I'll survive. I will survive.
I'm gonna stop pretending like people care about the behind the scenes stuff for this newest channel. So I'm just gonna keep the introduction as short as possible from now on. You can call me Mark or Marcus, and this video is part 2 of my discussion of SMT, Devil Survivor, and Persona. Part 1 was all about SMT, and it is broken into 2 videos, SMT4 and SMT5. I'll link both videos in the description if you want to watch those. In a segment I'll call The Opening, I'll say everything I know about a topic. Then I'll go into another segment called Closing, where I'll give any final thoughts and give my final verdict. These videos are supposed to be an overview where I try to hit on the major points of a topic rather than an in-depth analysis. I like this style because I think it can coexist with people who do near-hour videos on the same topics. With that out of the way, let's talk about Devil Survivor. Having covered SMT, it's now time to talk about Devil Survivor. Unlike SMT and Persona, Devil Survivor has never had an entry on a home console. Both games were released on the DS, which is where I first played them, and both games have enhanced versions on the 3DS. Despite being released so long ago, these games have unique mechanics that I've yet to see in SMT and Persona games. At least the ones I've played. In fact, one of the mechanics I'm thinking of right now takes something I like about SMT and combines it with something I like from Persona. I'll get to that later, but let's first talk about the series in general. So I mentioned that I first played the series on the DS. It would have been around the early 2010s. At this point, I would have only played Persona 3 and Persona 4. I didn't start playing Devil Survivor 1 because it was part of the SMT brand. I didn't even play an SMT game till years later. I played it because it was on a list of highly rated JRPGs on the DS. But playing Devil Survivor 1 is what made me discover that the SMT brand of games have similar themes and mechanics as one another. So I mentioned in my SMT4 video that a common theme throughout all 3 series was the apocalypse. And you can feel free to correct me here, but I think this is how each series implements that theme. With SMT, it's more of a traditional apocalyptic setting, where the world that you are playing in is a result of an apocalyptic event that already happened in the past. In Persona, it's a bit different. Because you are given the power to fight back so early on, it's more like you are preventing the event from occurring in the first place. I would say that Devil Survivor is in between the two, where you briefly experience life before the event begins, and you are given power around the same time. So it's now like Persona where you're trying to prevent the event from being completed, but it's also like SMT where you're trying to correct the damage that the event has already caused. And with that, I think it makes sense to now talk about the way the plot is handled in these games. So the way that the plot is handled in Devil Survivor is more like SMT. There are multiple endings that are based on the choices that you make throughout the games. The hardest path might be uniting factions under a common banner, or it might be leading a small handful of characters against the factions that disagree with you. And on a side note, Devil Survivor is the series that made humanity my go-to faction in the SMT universe.
I'm on the side of the humans.
Now I want to talk about the plot mechanic in Devil Survivor 2 that sort of takes elements from both SMT and Persona and combines them, and that is the fate system. So in Persona, you have social links, where you can rank up each character's social link and it gives you gameplay benefits. In Devil Survivor 2, you have fate levels, but with fate levels, just like the name implies, it determines the fate of characters in addition to gameplay benefits. So it's more like SMT in that your actions will have consequences for both party members and non-party members. It's not exactly this in-depth for SMT4, and especially not SMT5 however, as you aren't as focused on individual characters as you are the fate of the world in those games. Fate system in Devil Survivor 2 lets you focus on both the fate of the world and the fate of individual characters. Now the last thing I want to talk about is the overall gameplay. So no surprise, you summon infused demons and use those demons to fight in Devil Survivor.
It's just surprising, that's all.
But the added twist is that it's not just a turn-based RPG, it's a strategy turn-based RPG. This adds another level of complexity to combat. Every party member can summon multiple demons, so imagine if everyone in Persona were like the protagonist. Grid positioning is important because you can either team up on a single mob or get teamed on by multiple mobs. The difficulty is more in line with SMT, where you'll often hit parts where you'll need to grind a bit in each game. I'm not sure how bad this is in the 3DS games, but there are forum posts that say the DS grind was reduced, which is good because I think it was the first game where things started off decently paced, then suddenly you hit a brick wall where you need to start grinding. But anyway, you'll want to have a balanced team for each party member if you don't want to get insta-killed from certain elemental attacks. Normally I like to focus on just the protagonist, but having weak links can often sink you in these games, and I think Devil Survivor does a good job of making you care about balancing your parties outside of the protagonist. And when I say balanced parties, I don't mean in terms of stats, but in terms of being able to avoid most heavy damage abilities from most enemies. As for non-combat stuff, moving around the game reminds me of Persona 3 Portable on the PSP, where you select where you want to go rather than walking or running there. Even though I like the more immersive feeling of walking and running to places through controlling the character, I can't say it hurts the game by not having it. Some might say that it speeds up gameplay by not having it, which is a fair point. I don't have much to say about the graphics, as the game is a DS game after all. Within fights and dialogue sequences, animations and characters are relatively simplistic, but on a tactical grid, you see much more animation and the environments still look pretty decent on both the DS and 3DS. And lastly, I can't forget to talk about the music like I did for SMT. Outside of combat, the music is often mysterious and light sounding, but once you get into battle, it goes from 0 to 100 in terms of heaviness, and it's more rock and metal sounding. I'm not that great at describing genres of music unless it's very obvious. But I think I hit all the major points I wanted to discuss for Devil Survivor, so let's move on to closing. So, after playing Devil Survivor 1 for the first time in years, it made me remember just how well done the early game is. Within the first hour, you know many of the main characters, you know the general plot for the entire game, and you were given an easy to understand tutorial of the combat system. I think I still like the character designs of the main 3 characters of 1 than I do 2. I don't know, they look like they have that 2000s edge, which makes sense because that is when the game was released. But overall, I think 2 has more designs that I like than the original. And I think most people would agree that 2 upgrades pretty much every aspect of the original as well. Also, I like that they added voice acting to the 3DS ports, as I'm positive the DS versions didn't have voice acting at all. On a side note, I wanted to also mention that I have seen the anime for Devil Survivor 2. I don't think there has been one since Persona 5, but I respect that Atlus has done a lot of anime for their IPs. These days, we are seeing way more anime adaptations of things, and I think it's cool Atlus got on that trend early. But I think that's everything. I absolutely recommend both of these games if you haven't played them. I'm not sure if Atlus has any plans to touch the franchise in the near future, at least the third game. I'm somewhat optimistic about ports of the original 2 though. I think I might continue my replaythrough of the first one because it does feel nostalgic. But with that, I want to say thank you for watching, like and subscribe if you like this and want to see more. Feel free to discuss in the comments, as I always try to read and reply to each one, and I'll see you in whatever I decide to talk about next. Peace.